nature of the Big Bang and cosmos, my starting point is going to be a ray of light. And this ray of light has a speed c, which in vacuum is equal to 186,000 miles per second. Implication is that for light to express itself at some unit distance, it's going to take some time. Now, if we consider this implication at the microscale, and here I'm going to consider the realm of an atom, and assuming that there is some energy that's emanating from the center of the atom, the question is, how long or how would that energy express itself? And the clue is given to us by the finite speed of c, so it's going to take some minimum quanta before the energy here can express itself. Physically, that quanta is associated with Planck's constant h. But if we consider the formulation, there's a mathematical formulation for this energy that emanates, which is equal to Planck's constant times the frequency of light. But we also know that the speed of light is equal to the wavelength times the frequency. And if we combine these two equations together, essentially what we get is that E times lambda is equal to two constants c times h. And for any given value of E times lambda, what this implies is that there's an inverse proportionality between c and h. In other words, because of the finite speed of c, we have a minimum quanta h by which any kind of energy can express itself, which thereby provides a threshold value for energy to express itself in quanta, which is the basis of all matter. So in other words, the finite speed of c gives rise to matter. Now, this is a clue when we consider the nature of the Big Bang. And here, let's consider, for instance, that the implicit nature of light is to travel, and this is just a thought experiment, the implicit nature of light is to travel at a speed of infinity. But for some reason, it chooses to objectify itself, and in that objectification, if you will, it reduces its speed to c, which is 186,000 miles per second. And in that reduction of speed, the implication is that there's just a vast number of particles or matter that's created in a small finite space. So you have a huge number of particles in a small amount of space as c slows itself down, in a manner of speaking. And this is what creates this notion of the Big Bang, where you have the force that's created because of all these particles coming together in almost a small amount of space, wanting to rush out and create the basis of the cosmos. So the question is, if the nature of the Big Bang is really the nature of light as it objectifies itself, then how can we express what this nature is and what the nature of the cosmos which emanates out from here is? So let's consider a little more deeply this notion of c at an infinite speed. So what we're implying is, within a certain amount of space, if there is a source of light, then this light is instantaneously present in that entire area because of its speed. So there's a notion of omnipresence that's implicit in the nature of light. Similarly, there is nothing that will be able to resist this light within this space, and so there's a notion of omnipotence. If anything arises within this space, because light is totally present all the time, everywhere, it can sense or know anything that's happening, and therefore there's a notion of omniscience. And since everything is connected by this very same light, there's a notion of omniharmony. And we may simplify these terms and essentially call them presence, power, knowledge, and harmony, which seem to be implicit in this nature of light at this infinite speed. And so if you were to depict this mathematically, what we would say is that at some infinite speed of light, the nature implicit in it is some set whereby you have the action of these four powers: presence, power, knowledge, and harmony, and that's the essential nature of light. But now let's consider this aspect here where we have c, which we know is 186,000 miles per second. So coming down some levels of precipitation, we have c, which takes a finite amount of time to move from one point to another point. And what this finiteness in speed really means is that if you were to write this beam of light, and let's assume that you were on this beam of light over here, from this vantage point you would experience a past, a present, and a future. And not only that, but as we've seen from this aspect here, this finite speed creates islands of matter, or isolated islands of matter, and sets up the whole notion of connection between seemingly distinct emergences of particles of matter that exist in this sea of light. So we have these four aspects that a finite speed of light seems to have implicit in it, of a past, present, future, and connection. But when we look at the nature of past, present, future, and connection, what we'll see is that looking around us, everything is a result of the past. And so there's an incredible amount of presence, if you will, that this depicts. Similarly, when we think about the present is a play of an incredible amount of forces acting for expression. And so there's a notion of power whereby the most powerful force will express itself at any time. There's a notion of this trajectory moving towards some kind of undisclosed event, and therefore there's this implicit knowledge in the future, and the connection between these different islands of matter that we experience indicates a sense of harmony, whereby everything co-evolves towards some future that we yet do not have insight into. So when we look at the sea at a finite speed, and I'll depict this over here, then essentially what we're saying is that there's this past, there are these implicit qualities, past, present, future, connection, which are in their essence the same thing as presence, power, knowledge, harmony. But when we look around us, we see that there's an incredible diversity that exists. So the question is, how in this precipitation from here to here do these implicit qualities become this huge diversity that we experience physically? And so if we kind of abstract a process of precipitation of this light, and we'll consider two values here, one being c moving at some speed that is beyond our current speed of 186,000 miles per second, and perhaps closer to infinity, and we represent it by ck, and then intermediate between ck and c, some speed of light which is cn. Then essentially the question is, how does this set become this vast set that we experience here? And so what this means is that for this to happen mathematically, there has to be some kind of multiplication or expansion of these essential qualities here. So let's represent that by a set of presence, a set of power, a set of knowledge, and a set of harmony. And what we're saying is that reality at CK is a function of the reality at C infinity. And this precipitates here. And then similarly, for all this diversity to exist, there has to be seeds of uniqueness. And so the question is, how does this set become the basis for seeds of uniqueness? And here we can simply say that mathematically we can express an infinite set of uniqueness by considering combinations of the elements of these sets, which would be expressed by the set of presence times the set of power times the set of knowledge times the set of harmony. And we're saying that the reality at Cn is a function of the reality at Ck. And similarly, we're saying the reality at C is a function of the reality at Cn. So here's a codification of the incredible knowledge or intelligence that exists in light, that through a process of precipitation or slowing down begins to express itself in this incredible cosmos that we are a part of. But when we look further, we already know that at C we're experiencing these particles of matter. So we have this notion of a particle, or the basis of matter, as being directly related to this speed of light, finite speed of light. Now, we already established that there's an inverse proportionality between C and H being the basis of matter. So the question is, as you increase, or as the speed of light increases, as it goes up the scale, that means that this becomes bigger, then this H has to become smaller. So for H, if H becomes smaller, what that implies is that the quanta of energy starts to move towards zero, and as a result, matter cannot sustain itself. And so at some level where C is greater than C, where Cn is greater than C, existence expresses itself through waves, because matter cannot sustain itself. If we use this logic further, we would see that existence expresses itself in fields at some value where the speed of light is even greater than Cn, and at infinity, a block of sorts where that light is totally present in that whole block simultaneously. So this is when we think about things physically, but let's kind of reverse the direction and think about the metaphysical implication of this. So here we have a complete time-space possibility with all possibilities embedded in it. And then when we're coming down here to this level, what this means is that there are 4 divisions, and within these divisions, so these divisions correspond to each of these essences, and then within these divisions there are an infinite number of slices, if you will. And so there's the basis of a vast amount of variety, which is expresses itself as this set here. And then the wave essentially indicates that there's a connection between many of these slices to create unique seeds, and then the particle means that these unique seeds become the basis of matter. So when we consider the nature of ourselves, or the nature of everything that's around us, what we're saying is that there is an incredible quadrality that exists in the minuteness of particles that make everything up that we are. And this quadrality is kind of this block field wave particle quadrality where every single instant in this continuum of which we are a part has total access, or behind it exists the fullness of whatever that infinite light represents. And not only that, but everything here is in some sense a willed expression or a diverse expression of some possibility that exists here. And therefore we may say that we are part of a process, an incredible process by which we are co-evolving with this cosmos to some kind of set of undisclosed events that yet have to be uncovered. Good morning. I wanted to continue with the contemplation of this unified field, or more specifically the unified framework, and apply it to the issue of the expanding and contracting universe. Now, approximately 100 years ago, Einstein had stated that there is a dark energy that's responsible for the expansion of the universe. And if we dig into that a little bit, then what he was really implying is that there's a dark energy, represented by dE, which is such that the acceleration of galaxies, the moving of galaxies apart, is greater than the force of gravitational collapse of the universe due to its mass. And subsequently, what scientists have said is that the visible matter that we see around us, that constitutes the atoms and everything that's created as a result of that, is only 5% of the universe. So visible matter, represented by Vm, visible matter is 5%. They suggest that there's something called dark matter, which is 27%, and the remaining is something that they call dark energy, which is 68%. Now, when we think about this a little more deeply, then what they're really suggesting in light of this unified framework here is that quantum particles, atoms, cells, and everything that is built on these is just 5%, and that's visible matter. And we have seen how each of these layers, the potential seed state represented by the electromagnetic field and other fields, through cells and therefore any kind of living plant, animal, human, and so on, is an output of this equation here, or this framework. But also there's something called dark matter, which could be 27%, which, if we think about it in context of this framework, could be explained because any kind of matter, be it visible or dark matter, is not form-based, but it's function-based, and these functions are captured in the meta layers, and specifically in this meta layer 1 here, where we have deep signatures of functions, organizational signatures of functions that precipitate to form matter, or the different functions of matter, if you will. So we could hypothetically say that the dark matter is a result of this functional based orientation, which we do not have the instrumentation to really detect. Similarly, this dark energy could hypothetically be contained in this entire construct of the meta layers, because essentially from our point of view, this is an energy that's behind the precipitation of matter. But let's get a little more concrete. If we're saying that this entire construct of these metal layers is this dark energy, then what's kind of the pivotal aspect of it? And I suggest that the pivotal aspect is what we're calling M2, because what's in M3 is the essential aspects of light. So the four deep essences of presence, power, knowledge, harmony, which manifest at some subtle energetic level as these sets of presence, power, knowledge, and harmony. So there's a multiplication of the meaning of these essential qualities in these sets that have elements that are aligned with each of the four fundamental essences of presence, power, knowledge, and harmony. And as we've seen, this can directly create the very structure of visible matter. And so M2 is kind of the core. So if we translate this notion of dark energy, I could hypothesize that dark energy is somehow proportional to M2, but then to get more specific, what Einstein was saying was that dark energy is responsible for the expansion of the universe. And in this framework, what we're saying is that so long as there's a multiplication of the elements in M2 as depicted here, so long as these sets of M2 keep growing, then we continue to see a complexification of organization showing up at subsequently more intricate and diverse layers, all organized around these four principles. And so we could further specify this, that dark energy is a function of the growth of M2. And so bringing it back to this equation here, relating this, hopefully, insight into this notion of accelerating galaxies. Now, even the accelerating galaxies is only the visible aspect of this energy, but what is this energy that may be responsible for the galaxies accelerating apart? And that's what I'm suggesting is tied to this growth of M2. And so I could represent this as a threshold function by saying that so long as we have a condition in the universe which is all explained by this one unified framework, so long as we have a condition where the growth of M2 is above or equal to some threshold level, then we see this behavior of the acceleration of galaxies being greater than the gravitational collapse of the universe. And similarly, if we have this threshold function not being exceeded, so we have the dark energy being less than this threshold function, then we have the reverse phenomena of the gravitation, of the acceleration of galaxies being less than the gravitation of the universe, which would then lead to its collapse and, by some theories, a reconstituting and then an expanding out again. But the question is, why would I say that M2 is the link factor to the dark energy? And here, if we think about it in terms of the human collectivities, as suggested in the last video, up until this point here, from electromagnetic through cellular, there's an automaticity. The system itself is creating these layers of complexity. With the arrival of the human being, we have the action of will that we had represented by this notion of being able to exceed certain patterns that are the result of very limited untransformed sets. And so if we were to continue along the trajectory of being led in all our organization and in our social collectivities by an untransformed physical, vital, mental, and integral set, then we would never really take the possibility that's codified in light in these deep sets and express or manifest them in any tangible way. We would always be lost in fact, diminishing the set of M2s. So what would happen if this were the only active kind of matrix or ingredient in this upward flow here, then rather than M2 expanding, we would see M2 contracting. And with that contraction, the very nature or purpose of the universe in this framework is we're going against that, and therefore there's a collapse that's depicted over here. Whereas if we continue to complexify, meaning we break the barriers so that we overcome these seed patterns, and as I had suggested earlier, we then give energy to this recursive function so that xt feeds back into xu, then by definition we're creating a set of M2 that has more and more elements, and therefore the entire framework of field is being fed with a different kind of energy that then would result in this acceleration of galaxies being greater than the gravitational collapse of the universe. And we may say, adding in one more distinction here, that just as we have this action of will when human beings arise in this complex system, and we become observers while we're part of the system, we have a different kind of power in that we can direct the way that the system may advance. Similarly, there's a witness function M3 that we may hypothesize sets up certain constants in order to manage the system. One such constant being the threshold value of this aspect of dark energy that we're calling growth of M2. And so long as that's exceeded, then the universe will keep developing with more and more complexity. And that could be the rationale or the sense of how, in fact, we, being such intricate parts of this entire universe, the amount of power that we have and the amount of action that we take can influence, reverse influence this entire layers of energy that kind of precipitate down to inform how things continue to develop.